I used 3i and the 3i harness to create a little security scanner that takes a GitHub repository subtree like this and returns a list of security vulnerabilities found in that tree. And to do that, I wanted specifically something that gives me a web dashboard at the end. I wanted something that records everything into a database rather than just kind of a text result. So I wanted something pretty interactive. And then I wanted all the work to be done in parallel because something like this can contain lots of files and it's better to do everything in parallel. Something else that I didn't want was LLM orchestration because something like this has a lot of files potentially. And when using LLM to orchestrate such complex runs with so many files, we're potentially relying on the LLM to kind of do a lot of very detailed work around kind of lists of files and passing that around, and that is error prone and is going to be expensive and slow. Instead, we want to rely on reactive orchestration or function-based orchestration that I'm going to show you in a bit, and 3i is a perfect tool to implement that. So let's have a look exactly at how that worked. I started with a prompt like this that basically supplied the GitHub subtree, and then I kind of gave a couple of overall directions for kind of what I want to obtain. And then I specifically mentioned that I want the workers to, the sub agents to be doing the work in parallel, and I want the orchestration to be reactive. So there's no polling, there's no kind of waiting for things to vanish. Everything should be fully reactive. So the harness went ahead and kind of prepared a plan for me on how to proceed. And to prepare that plan, it went and looked for the workers which are already available in the current 3i system. It looked at the registry as well to see what is available in the registry that may not be available locally but easily installable, and produced a plan exactly as I asked it for. And in the plan, it indicated the different things that it's going to install the workers. It's going to kind of make these changes. It's going to build the dashboard. It's going to do all of these different things. And I basically told it, let's go. It started building, pulled in the workers that it said it's going to pull in. So for example, here it pulled in the database worker, and then here it pulled in the HTTP worker, and so on and so forth. And then it did the building as described. And then at a we kind of tested that the endpoint is working. Here, I think it was not yet working, and then it made some more changes. And then at this point, we're getting to the orchestration layer. So here you can see it registering triggers, right? So triggers are going to be used for once a sub-agent finishes its batch of work, we're going to be using triggers, or the system is going to be using triggers to get a new sub-agent going. So this is kind of how it registered it. And then you can see here, there's the number of registered triggers showing up directly in the console. And then once things are starting to work, then you can see actually the notifications about triggers being fired and the reactions happening here in the main conversation. So how does this work exactly? So let's have a look at one of the sub-agents over here. Here's an example of one of the sub-agents that got spun up, and you can see that this has a dedicated prompt that is basically supplying a bunch of specific tasks for the sub-agents to do. And then this does exactly what is described over here, and writes the results into the place that into the state so that we can react to it. And then once this gets finished, the trigger also runs and triggers this task over here. So this is another prompt that verifies that there's more work to be done, right? And in this case, there is more work to be done. And so, well, actually, in this one, there's not. But basically, it is saying that there's all of the slots for all of the agents are currently taken. So there's no action needed in here. But basically, this way, it continues through all of the different sub-agents, and there's 5 here, and then there's a bunch more here, and there's a bunch more here. And this way, it has worked through the entire subtree as I wanted, exactly as I wanted, right? And then it kind of did all of this work, and then presented me with a dashboard that looks pretty much like this, right? So it sorts the critical vulnerabilities, high, medium, and a bunch of lows, which is exactly as I wanted in a little web dashboard, all done completely with very little direction from 0, right? So completely from 0. And then something else that I did at the end of this session, so I took the process that was happening in here, and I asked the harness to turn this into a worker, right? Because I wanted to be able to reuse this work across multiple conversations. So this was just an exploration, and I wanted to make this a little bit closer to something production-like. So I literally asked it, make me a worker, and it went ahead and made a worker. you can see here that it kind of did the work and then tested it. And then I was able to use it in a different conversation over here, right? So here I specifically said use the new worker that you just created. And then you can see here that it is kind of doing the setup and then doing the plan as in the previous session. And then it is already using the functions from this worker that it created. And then the same way here, the sub agents are doing all of the work, and everything is working the same way, except it's a worker. Yeah, it's quite nice. So overall, I use a prompt to create a security scanner that did exactly what I wanted with very little input required from me. And the 3i harness pulled everything that it needed from the current setup as well as from the workers registry. Then did the whole thing, created the dashboard, did the scanning using parallel sub agents, using the reactive coordination so that the LLM doesn't have to spend cycles coordinating all the different agents. And then at the end, even turned it into a worker for me exactly as I requested.